we are talking about how a brain, scientifically, there is a biological rewiring that make you different. Yeah, that's the science.
Ada juga antara sesiapa lah, whichever category that feels maybe medical model tak berapa sesuai dalam society kami hari ni.
Kita masih lagi nak ada standard yang kita pakai sejak dulu lagi tau. Kita masih tak ubah. Jadi belum cukup inklusif lah sebenarnya kalau kita masih menggunakan perspektif macam tu.
Tapi tak, ni ada sistem dia. So lepas banyak berfikir panjang tu.
So what did you do?
Tukar sekolah.
Assalamualaikum. Hi everybody. We're back. Kami Kita Family kembali dengan episod ke-22. Di Kita Family, kami akan membincangkan perihal yang berkaitan dengan makna serta kepentingan untuk berhidup bermasyarakat. Kita menghargai keunikan serta kepelbagaian sesama kita. Kita meraihkan masyarakat yang berbilang agama, kaum, rupa, bangsa dan juga keupayaan. Kita ingin mempromosikan hidup yang lebih inklusif yang mengambil kira kepentingan kita semua, ya, kepentingan segenap lapisan masyarakat, terutama bagi mereka yang kurang atau berkelainan keupayaan. So that's Kita Family. Di sini kita ada full quorum, ya, 4 orang di studio. Dan of course kita mulakan dulu dari Kota Kinabalu, Sabah. Hello.
Hai, Assalamualaikum. Didi from KK.
Back to KL. Okay, di sebelah kanan saya, immediately looking angelic in white, Anit.
Hello, apa khabar?
Sebelah Anit, adik kita.
Hai, salam sejahtera.
That's Desiree. And next to Desiree is SK.
Apa khabar?
Alright, so here we are. Tonight, we are going to maybe get a little bit technical. Dan kita ingin menyebut tentang neurodivergence dan terutamanya fokus pada autism untuk membincangkan sesuatu perkara yang mungkin agak baru. This is something that is starting to be discussed now. Iaitu apakah perbezaan melihat atau menggunakan lensa terhadap neurodivergence dari segi medical model ataupun social model or strength-based model. So why are we going to talk about this? What is the difference? And of course, why does it matter? Apakah pentingnya kita membezakan antara kedua-dua ini? Apakah definisi tiap-tiap model dan keperluannya? Untuk tidak melengahkan masa lagi, I'm gonna head on straight to our kakak to help us talk about apakah model dari segi sudut medical apabila kita membincangkan tentang neurodivergence seperti autism dan sebagainya. Over to you, SK.
Thank you, Nori. And for me, I'm rasa sangat gembira lah buat masa ni. What I find is the term neurodiversity or neurodivergence is starting to be more, getting to be more familiar or introduced in many conversations that involve autism, dyslexia, ADHD. Sebenarnya, this discussion about medical model versus social model, let me circle back a little bit. As a medically trained professional, kami semua reference a diagnostic tool or a reference called the DSM-5. And as a professional, we reference this, it's like a dictionary lah, that defines and help the medical doctors and the professionals make diagnosis as part of the assessment of different, in this instance, neurodevelopmental challenges.
Okay.
And we are trained to identify the symptoms
Mhm.
and the features that help us, if you like, list down consistent challenges, or the word used often is disabilities or deficits, so that as a medical profession, we treat. Kan? Kalau kami doktor, memang our role is to treat something that is not well.
Okay.
So there exists in all medical treatment what we term as the medical model.
Mhm.
Now, around 1998, a sociologist from Australia, who herself is a high ability Asperger, masa tu still have the term Asperger.
Sebelum DSM-5.
Sebelum kami tukarkan definisi dalam DSM. So her name is Judy Singer. I always want to recognize Judy Singer. She was the one who introduced the term neurodiversity. Dalam konteks diverse meaningnya different. Yeah? Neuro is your brain. And this brought to a movement that now many, especially parents and adults, want to embrace, and more, including professionals, because what it differentiates is this. It works on the ability or the strength of each individual. It works on the fact that this is how I am made, this is naturally me, and what we need to do to enable untuk memperkasakan our ability is let's try to change the environment so that the best of us can be wujudkan, that we can operate in our different ability. If, for example, you learn about my need to what we call STIM, it's okay for me to do this because I'm communicating that I'm excited. Kan?
Yep.
If I clap, we often do that when we are excited. That is me expressing my emotion, the way I communicate. So coming back then, pulling it back, dalam medical model, we learn to recognize what difficulty you have, we treat it. In the social model, simplistically, we recognize that this is me, but what can the people around me, what can the environment around me do to allow me to be my best?
So kalau saya boleh bertanya, of course memang kita menganggap penting untuk kita memahami keadaan seorang individu, right? We're talking about a condition. Tapi apakah approach ataupun bagaimana kita lihatkan suatu keadaan di mana kita tahu sangat tinggi peratusannya sesuatu simptom kalau berkaitan dengan autism sebagai contoh, sebenarnya tidak boleh dirawat sepenuhnya, right? So how does that work? How does that look like kalau kita melihat dari segi medical model ni?
So again, if I can just say my personal projection or take of this medical and social model actually is it need to coexist. Kan? So we are talking about how a brain, scientifically, there is a biological rewiring that make you different. Yeah, that's the science. So we have to recognize in our treatment, pun there is a optimal level of treatment or healing.
For outcome.
For
Yes.
whatever condition there may be. Kan? So then if we recognize and combine what we must intervene, what we must do to this is that optimal already for the individual.
Okay.
That is moving from awareness to acceptance and the appreciation. kan? Because as a
okay.
human being, kami memang rasa yang we have to do something, right? Because generally speaking, we want to act on it. However, kalau kami ada acceptance-nya, we understand-nya, this is the optimum. And we need to allow the individual to be in their best ability. We've talked about inclusion, kan? But maybe I'm reminded by our good friend Jacqueline Ang.
Yep.
We really perhaps should be using the term integration a lot more. Kalau you need support, you are operating already at your optimum. We need the community, we need the professional, we need the family to integrate with our ability so that that's our best. Instead of just trying to cure, trying to heal,
And
trying
that's one of the steps towards inclusion anyway, right? You
Absolutely,
take
kan?
the side by side and you take the recognizing first before it's like, okay, full acceptance and everything is okay with all the available accommodation yang ada, kan?
Yeah.
Okay, kalau saya boleh minta Desiree bagi komen sikit sebab saya tahu Desiree memang hendak bercakap tentang bagaimana social model ini berkaitan dengan strength-based approach. Silakan.
Terima kasih Nuri, and thank you Kakak for the explanation on the medical model. Sebab pada pendapat saya, memang terdapat banyak pendapat sekarang ni. We have more self-advocates out there speaking, which we really respect and appreciate that their voices are being heard. Tetapi ada juga antara sesiapa lah, whichever category that feels maybe medical model tak berapa sesuai dalam society kami hari ni.
Okay.
Because of things like what Judy Singer has done, the neurodiversity movement, the use of the words neurodivergent. Tetapi bagi saya, like Kakak SK pun cakap tadi, both these models sebenarnya mesti coexist. In my opinion, one is not more important than the other. Sebab kita kena acknowledge, tanpa medical model ni, the autism diagnosis takkan wujud. I think it's very important that we acknowledge that. Without the medical model, without the DSM-5, we would not have this autism as a diagnosis. Kan? Which is why I think sebelum the DSM-5, a lot of misdiagnosis lah. It could have been autism but classified as something else, and then didn't know how to, as we say in the medical terms, treat it or intervene or give the proper intervention. So in order for us to move towards a society that's more inclusive, kedua-dua model ni haruslah berkawan baik lah, kawan-kawan lah.
The
right?
inclusive part, but also I think to help every individual properly, kan? Untuk
Absolutely.
untuk mengenali bahawa seseorang mungkin mempunyai cabaran yang tertentu dan perlu diberi sokongan yang sesuai. Tetapi pada masa yang sama, itu bukanlah kira cara kita patut macam mana what am I trying to say? I think I'm trying to say that's not how we should define and only think about the individual, right? Dari
Yes.
segi apa-apa yang menjadi kelemahan
Correct.
atau keupayaan dia yang
Atau kelebihan.
tidak sama dengan orang lain and things like that.
So look at
Yeah.
them first as a person, as we do with each other, kan? When we meet, hi, I'm Desiree, I'm mixed race, that's why I look like this. I'm not going to go out and say, hi, I'm Desiree, I'm autistic. That's not if I were
Yeah.
right on the spectrum, that's probably not the first way I'm going to introduce myself. Right? So I think the point of the social model is to look at the person as a person. They have their unique traits. And sebelum kita mulakan recording tadi, saya berbincang dengan Kakak SK. She's always our guiding light for all of us. Ada berbincang pasal Hans juga. And how I've been a very strong advocate for the social model as well. To make the necessary accommodations for him. Dan kami juga ikut segala yang direkomend oleh doktor, the pediatrician.
Yeah.
From early intervention, from the age of 2, sekarang dah 9 tahun. So by seeing both perspectives, sekarang at the age of 9, he still needs to go back for reassessments because when our children don't meet certain milestones, maybe there's something else there. Kan?
Okay.
So for example, sekarang ni Hans sudah berumur 9 tahun tetapi still ada masalah untuk mengeja. right? And has problems with fine motor skills despite banyak and quite intensive OT for all these years. So for me, in my mind, yes, we want to make the accommodations, tetapi we need to still go back to the medical model, reassess and reevaluate. Mungkin ada sesuatu lagi, kan? If there is something like dyspraxia or this family, whether it's dyslexia or dyscalculia, kadang-kadang he doesn't like doing maths, right? So we have to still go back to the medical model and reassess. So that is my point that yes, we want strength-based, but medical model is still relevant.
Okay, but talk a bit more about the strength base, because that's actually where I
Yes,
nudged
that's where
you.
we're going. Yes.
Okay.
So the strength-based part that I would like to emphasize is strength ni kelebihan tidak bermaksud mereka berbakat. It does not limit, the strength-based does not mean savant skills. We are very happy and very proud of our autistic friends who are savants, yang berbakat, pandai melukis, menyanyi dan sebagainya. Is well and good. Tetapi it is not the case for everyone. Kalau kita tengok pada statistik, right, is approximately 1 dalam 10 orang autistik sahaja yang ada savant skills. Dan
Macam genius lah tu.
yes,
orang yang
that's
ada sahabat
considered
ni yang-
genius.
Yeah.
And the savant skills genius tak semestinya dari segi IQ.
Yeah.
As well. It could be musical skills, it could be artistic skills, tapi maybe in when it comes to maths or science, maybe memang mereka tak boleh, right? So savant skills pun definisi dia is very wide,
Okay.
right? And there's also a 1% of people with brain injury that have savant skills, but they're not autistic. So the point is savant skills is not exclusive to autistics.
Okay.
Right? And the other thing which I'm reminded Kakak SK once presented is that with autism, in nowhere does it say that it's an intellectual disability.
Yeah.
If there is an intellectual disability in an autistic person, that is a secondary or a different diagnosis.
Or a coexisting,
Or a
condi-
coexisting
condition.
condition.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's very important. The why I bring that up is it's important to understand kalau seseorang itu autistic, they are autistic. If they are savants, it's something else alongside the autism. It's comorbid. Likewise, if there's an intellectual disability, it's comorbid side by side with the
Okay.
autism.
So if it's not that, then what is strength based to you?
Okay, so to me, strength-based is using things that they like, using things that motivate them. So, very simple example, baru-baru ni we hear from Hans school teachers, dia sangat frustrated ketika buat matematik.
Okay.
Alright, which I can empathize. Saya pun masa kecil memang not a fan.
Sama-sama.
Matematik, kan? So we said, you know what, cikgu, jangan risau. Why not, jangan buat matematik untuk 2 minggu dengan Hans. Cikgu terperanjat.
Okay.
Cikgu's like, Mummy, are you sure? Because they are trained to call us Mummy, not
Yeah,
that I'm
yeah.
her mom. Mummy, are you sure? I said, yes, cikgu. Cuba try dengan Hans for the next 2 weeks. Jangan buat apa-apa berkaitan dengan maths. Let's see, maybe dia akan improve in other areas.
Okay.
It's been a couple of days and memang boleh nampak Hans is more cheerful dekat sekolah, he's more interactive with his teachers, dah kurang button pushing dengan cikgu baru. You know, so strength based is about number one, not forcing them to do what they really don't want. Kan? He's 9, apalah pentingnya nak to learn addition at this point of time. It's okay, you can't do it. You can do it when you're 12, when you're 14, that's fine by me. Dia ada skills and strengths lain yang that he can pursue. Right? So strength based is also something that is their strength and something that they like on their terms, not what we want their strength to be.
Yeah. I think that's very important. That's happened to, I think in our family lately, we've been trying to think about how, what are the things that are important and good to Timor as opposed to for Timor, right? The for is the thing yang kita sebagai ibu bapa, kita akan fikirkan lah apa yang penting buat anak kita. Tapi kepada anak kita, kalau kita tanya dia sendiri, adakah benda sesuatu ni memang penting? Dia nak ke benda ni, you know? Mungkin ada perbezaan yang jelas, right? So of course, kita dah sebagai ibu bapa memang ini akan menjadi priority. Tetapi nak juga diingatkan, as you are trying to remind us today, that kita wajar fikirkan juga apa yang anak kita suka, apakah yang akan memberikan dia motivasi, apakah yang akan membawa kebahagiaan dalam hidup dia, kan? So because when you're more settled, obviously you're happy, a lot of more things can happen, right? Ani, please jump in.
Okay, I just want to say that kepada seseorang itu mereka patut dipandang dengan lensa individu. That every individu is unique. So I remember when I received the diagnosis, I wanted to go out there. Internet was not so big, to buy a book on autism, and the only thing that I could get was The Complete Guide to Asperger's Syndrome by Tony Edward. That was the only book that was available in any of the bookstores that I went to. Since then, he has written several other books. But not just him. I have noticed that ramai lagi penulis telah mengeluarkan buku berkenaan autisma, dan ada yang topiknya macam uniquely human, unmasking autism. Sebab ini adalah satu konsep that is evolving, and I believe that even the medical model is learning from the evolving concept. Sebab saya dan Nuri boleh say this because doktor-doktor yang kami jumpa pun pandangan mereka berkenaan bagaimana nak mencabar dan membantu anak-anak kami.
Telah berubah dalam 10 tahun lebih.
Memang telah berubah. It's so evolving that but that when they say some of these things, we actually sit back and said, hey, is this the same person who was telling us last time, jangan buat benda ni, cuba benda ni, let them conform.
But I'm so proud of our doctors.
am.
Because they stay on top of the
Totally
knowledge
agree.
information, dan terus
Yes.
they will make that decision to make the change accordingly,
Yeah.
right? Which is really great. While we were on the strength basis now, sorry, actually I wanted to ask Didi, kalau Didi dengan pengalaman Didi dengan the girls, you know, when you see strength based and looking at individual abilities and interests, how has that been for you?
Well, sebab kita punya tema pun kan meraihkan kepelbagaian. So meaning that we cannot put one standard for everybody. So bila kita kata kita nak meraihkan strength base, because strength base, I selalu cakap macam ni tau. Kita dulu masa kita kecil-kecil kan, kalau ada seorang budak yang pandai, dia akan dapat A dalam semua subjek, betul tak? Yang dapat nombor 1 tu. Dia akan pandai semua. Tapi kalau kanak-kanak autistik kan, ada antara mereka yang boleh score certain subjects, tapi subjek yang lain dia flop. So
sangat ekstrim. It's like A and
sangat
F.
Extreme. A and F. Lepas tu nak letak dekat mana? Dekat kelas nombor 1 ke? Kelas nombor 2 ke? Dekat mana nak ni kan? Sebab kita masih lagi nak ada standard yang kita pakai sejak dulu lagi tau. Kita masih tak ubah. Jadi belum cukup inklusif lah sebenarnya kalau kita masih menggunakan perspektif macam tu. Dan kalau cerita pasal pengalaman saya daripada anak-anak saya kecil kan, saya teringat masa tu saya tak tahu yang itu ada satu strength base. Yang saya tahu satu tu saya rasa marah bila ada satu terapis buat komen, dia cakap bukan terapis, I don't know, someone yang berpengaruh lah buat komen, dia kata tidak ada apa yang boleh dibanggakan kalau anak anda boleh membaca pada umur 3 tahun. Saya macam memanglah anak kita yang hyperleksia tidak diajar, tapi kenapa tak boleh bangga? Dan apa yang saya buat, yang saya tak tahu yang itu sebenarnya adalah strength based approach. Bila anak saya mula pergi jumpa speech therapist pada umur 3 tahun kan, dia perlu ada senarai bunyi-bunyi konsonan yang saya perlu latih dia sebut. Like bah, so ABC daripada A sampai Z lah. So what I did was, because dia dah boleh baca, so saya ambil masa tu gunting majalah lah. Masa tu masih ada lagi majalah surat khabar kan. Kita gunting, kita tampal dalam buku kosong dan tulislah perkataan tu. A, tak ingatlah A apa, B, bag, C, mungkin car lah, saya buat sendiri kan. Dan saya latih dia macam tu, dia jadi lebih mudah sebab dia dah boleh baca.
Yeah.
So itu
tak perlu
saya rasa-
ikut planning exactly yang daripada terapis tu lah. Dia buat cara sendiri.
Ya, sebab auditory dia mungkin lemah lah masa tu, sebab kan bila kita panggil pun dia tak nak pandang lagi. Jadi bila benda tu dalam bentuk visual, and then strength dia memang dia suka huruf, dia suka membaca. Dia jadi lebih mudah saya kaedah tu bila saya buat. Dan saya rasa kita perlu faham lah yang autism ni ada satu, bukan semualah antaranya kan, yang ada monotropic vision. Monotropic maksudnya bila dia minat kepada sesuatu, boleh buat satu bidang tu, dia dah tak nampak uh, di luar bidang tu tahu. Dia terlampau fokus. Dan tahap fokus tu kadang-kadang dia boleh buat lebih daripada apa yang ada dalam syllabus, apa yang cikgu present. Sebab dia minat kan, jadi dia akan buat research lagi, tengok dalam mungkin search internet, dan then baca lagi buku teks, baca lebih daripada apa yang ada dalam kurikulum tu sendiri. Jadi macam perlu ke kita tahan macam, oh okay, awak tak bagus dalam bahasa Melayu tapi awak bagus dalam sains, awak tak layak lagi untuk pergi ke tingkatan seterusnya dan sebagainya. Jadi saya rasa dah sampai masanya untuk ada satu kurikulum yang bukan istimewa, yang khas untuk anak-anak ni. Sebab kita kan sekarang masih lagi, macam saya sendiri pun masih mix and match lah. Terpaksa bila kita pergi dapatkan perkhidmatan daripada pusat-pusat swasta, kita mix and match ikut kecenderungan anak, apa yang dia minat. Sebab bila benda yang dia tak minat tu jadi susah. Tapi tidak bermakna yang kita tak akan ajar langsung benda yang dia tak minat. Kita gunakan minat dia untuk mengajarlah apa yang dia masih lemah tu kan. Itu yang kata tadi, bila medical model adalah untuk mengurangkan defisit kan, mengurangkan kekurangan dia, fill in apa yang tak boleh lagi. Tapi strength based tu, kalau kita gunakan approach strength based, dia lebih mudah sebab we enjoy what we like. Macam tadi saya terfikir satu analogy.
We enjoy what we like. Perfect.
Ya, I terfikir satu analogi kan. Katalah kita masuk satu kelas baru kan. Satu kelas tu ada 10 orang. And then we get to know our friends kan, 10 orang. So we get to know, but selalunya kita sebagai orang typical, kita akan tahu sama banyak lah. Oh, dia daripada mana kan, latar belakang dia mungkin daripada kawasan mana dan sebagainya. Tapi kalau dalam masa 2 hari kita dah jatuh cinta dengan salah seorang classmate kita, do you think kita ada masa kita akan berkenalan dengan lagi 9 orang yang lain? Adakah sama?
Yeah.
Jadi
I like that analogy. I like it.
Betul.
Yes.
I think everybody boleh faham tu. Bila kita dah
Yes.
minat dengan something tu, of course yang tu lah kita tahu, yang tu yang kita kenal. No, but thank you so much. Jadi that was actually a perfect example that benda yang dianggap rumit pun, so seperti Didi sebut, satu, kalau dia minat, dia akan belajar dengan lebih laju. For example, right? Tapi kita tak juga nak abaikan benda-benda yang mungkin perlu, tetapi dia kurang minat ataupun lebih susah bagi dia. Tapi kalau kita ambil sudut ni, that which is the strength base, memikirkan apakah yang boleh menjadi, yang memang menjadi kekuatan dari segi keupayaan dan kemahiran yang ada dan minat bagi anak kita. Benda yang susah tu pun mungkin kalau kita boleh pandai mengaplikasikan sesuatu yang berkaitan dengan apa yang dia minat, yang dia tak suka tu pun mungkin dia boleh belajar. Yang itu pun mungkin dia
They'll warm up to it.
they will warm up to it.
Yes.
Or dia macam akan menggunakan kaedah yang tertentu lah. So it's very interesting that we are actually doing this now with my so-called typical child. So it's abang, so it's for Jibril, not so much for Timo, tapi dia sendiri merupakan seseorang yang cara dia belajar memang agak berbeza lah kalau berbanding dengan ramai kawan dia and things like that. I think a lot of us, kalau kita tengok dari segi manusia ni lah, many of us are visual ataupun auditory. Maknanya satu, visual ni kita memang suka membelajar dengan melihat sesuatu. Ada yang suka mendengar dan akan tangkap lebih cepat kalau kita dengar. But Jib is different. So dia memang perlu bergerak, dia perlu mengalami sesuatu, and for that is something that is itu adalah sesuatu yang membantu dia kalau dia nak belajar, let's say, topik baru and things like that. So antara perubahan yang telah kita lakukan baru-baru ni is that bila dia cuba untuk mengingat kembali dan membuat kerja rumah dia dan dia buat ulang kaji. So the change that happened recently, which is very interesting, is that dia tak duduk tau. Dia berjalan. Dia berjalan and then dia membaca. Dia baca seolah-olah macam dia membaca skrip. Dia baca secara kuat. So dia menyebut. So he's not just reading quietly. Then it made a difference. So it's amazing. So kita menggunakan kelebihan yang ada pada dia sebagai seorang yang suka berlakon. Dia boleh menari, menyanyi. Dia memang suka boxing sebagai contoh, music. And that is a lot of movement, right? A lot of movement, a lot of like get into character. So kita telah cuba untuk mengambil elemen-elemen di sini dan meletakkannya dalam academic context. Tengok boleh tak membantu dia. InsyaAllah. I hope. But at least for that one topic, dia tiba-tiba tangkap lebih cepat. So that was really, really interesting. Shall we take a little bit of a break? Then we come back? Yeah? Alright. See you guys in a little bit. Okay, selamat kembali ke segmen kedua dalam episod 22 kita Family Podcast, di mana kita membincangkan apakah perbezaan di antara medical model dan social model dan kaitannya dengan perkara seperti strength based. Also, there's another phrase that we didn't mention yet, which is connected to all of this: neuro affirming. Very, very big kind of phrase. So I want to go back to Kakak again for that, to tell us a little bit about apa maksudnya neuro affirming ni. Maknanya mengesahkan sesuatu yang berkenaan dengan otak dan minda. I don't know if I'm translating that well, but if you can explain that a little bit. And also I think kita sebenarnya tak dapat menghabiskan lagi bab menceritakan tentang kepentingan medical model ni dan sebagai rujukan. Selain daripada DSM-5, kalau tak silap saya, ada yang lain kan, bergantung kepada negara mana dan taksiran dia macam mana untuk mendapatkan diagnosis dan sebagainya. So again, over to you Kakak.
Okay. Yes, Nori. Sebenarnya, the general is we refer medically to DSM, and tapi because we have international audience, ada juga rujukan to ICD. That's the International Classification of Disease.
Okay.
And biasanya the European countries will reference that, and ICD tu diupdatekan by World Health Organization yearly. Yeah. So that's just for completeness.
Yang tu pun boleh digunakan untuk diagnosis.
Of course. Yeah, dia rujukan kan.
Okay.
Yeah. So DSM-5 dan ICD I think now is at 11. Yeah?
Okay.
So that is for completeness of information lah. So coming then to neuroaffirming. So as an extension of this new narrative kami gunakan untuk neurodiversity, we then have to do the action. Kan? So in neuroaffirming actions is what can we do, what can we execute to support what we want to use as strength-based.
Okay.
So in simple terms, neuro-affirming therapies, neuro-affirming intervention.
So maknanya kita mengiktiraf keadaan otak dan minda seseorang individu yang neurodivergent.
So kami boleh
Okay.
to act lah. Actionnya is to be neuro-affirming.
Okay.
And that includes things like what are the preparation of environment.
Okay.
Yeah. How do we
Capable
deliver?
environments.
So all these become neuro-affirming actions. I suppose that's how I like to describe it.
Okay.
Um,
Cool.
Have you been encountering that a lot more in your work? Can I ask Desiree?
Sure. So you mean the neuro-affirming part. I think I see a rise in people leaning towards neuro-affirming. So meaning accepting that there is challenges and accepting that strength base means working on the strength. But another point I want to touch is the challenges bit. We don't emphasize the challenges, but we acknowledge it. So for
Okay.
example, probably, the next time I sit down to try and do maths with Hans, I'll tell him, okay, I know this is challenging for you. Maybe we don't do this today. And why would I do that? Because I want him to know I'm acknowledging. I know it's a challenge. I'm not going to push you now.
Okay.
Right? So that's the other thing I wanted to add to the strength-based thing. It's not just happy all the time, do what they like, do what motivates them. But it's also what Nuri said earlier. If maybe we give it a break for a little while, lama-lama, they might warm up to it. When they don't feel the pressure, kita pun sama. Kalau benda yang kita tak berapa suka dulu dekat sekolah, mesti ada subjek yang kita tak berapa suka, tetapi mesti cukup syarat lah. Jangan ada tanda merah dalam report card.
Yep.
Right? So we need to be in a proper frame of mind, find the proper learning technique, seperti Nuri ceritakan pasal Jibril tadi, using a learner-centered approach. And then slowly work on it. So it's not about neuro-affirming, yes, acknowledging what they can do, what is challenging. But at the same time, I want to add my personal thing to it, which is just because it's challenging, it doesn't mean we completely stop doing it.
Yes.
Kan, like I just said mathematics, I gave cikgu a timeline, 2 minggu. I'm not saying jangan selama-lamanya buat maths dengan Hans.
Yeah.
We'll do it again. Tapi maybe give him a break. Kita pun bosan hari-hari buat 2 tambah 3, 2 tambah 3. I will get annoyed. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add on neuro-affirming.
Didi, kita berpeluang sebenarnya membincangkan topik-topik ni pada masa kita family dijemput oleh UiTM that time. But I want to hear from you on this because masa tu Didi tak dapat bersama-sama dengan kami. And we touched on it a little bit tadi masa break. Can you jump in on this please?
Well, neuro-affirming for me is kita mengiktiraf yang ada neurological dari segi neurologi yang berbeza, tak sama dengan yang kebiasaannya lah. Typical orang biasa, orang normal, neurologinya begini. Kalau neuro-affirming maksudnya ada lagi neurologi yang berlainan, yang lain. Contoh macam autism, ADHD kan. Dan for me, bila kita mula mengiktiraf yang ada orang yang berbeza, dia sama macam kita dalam Malaysia ni mengiktiraf selain daripada Melayu, ada bangsa-bangsa lain juga. Jadi, bila kita mengiktiraf, kita bagi peluang untuk mereka grow, develop dengan identiti mereka sendiri. Gitu yang ada rumah ibadat berlainan agama kan, and kita pun dengan makanan yang berbeza-beza, dengan budaya yang berbeza-beza, tapi akhirnya ada juga yang akan kita sama-sama kongsi, sama-sama suka. Contoh macam nasi lemak, roti canai, sama juga dengan mereka yang neurodivergent. Ada, bukan semua yang mereka enjoy tu tak sama langsung dengan kita yang neurotypical, betul tak? Ada yang sama. Jadi bila kita tahu apa yang sama, apa yang tak sama, senanglah kita nak hidup bersama-sama sebab kita kena bagi dia peluang untuk dia buat apa yang dia perlu, dan kita tak boleh push semua yang kita nak tu, yang kita buat nak dia buat juga. So that's how I see neuro-affirming lah.
Sebenarnya tadi as you were describing, Nuri, what Jibril needed to learn, that is neuro-affirming.
Yes.
When kami recognize yang sebenarnya untuk dia belajar, memang seorang like Jibril need movement.
Tak boleh nak duduk lama-lama.
So dalam language education, itu adalah kinesthetic learner.
Yes.
Kan?
He's a kinesthetic learner.
So but if I pull it back dalam keadaan autisma, neuro-affirming can be kalau the person doesn't look at you, the eye contact, we always
emphasize a bit too
look at me.
much.
Look at me kan.
Can be
Tengok mata
scary.
saya. Tengok mata saya.
There's a book
Kan?
called Look Me in the Eye.
That's right.
Pandang.
Sebenarnya once we recognize and we are neuro-affirming, we understand yang sebenarnya dia masih mendengari kami
Yes.
tanpa eye contact.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
that I think is a very, very basic for me
Yep,
in
betul.
the world of neurodiversity, in the world of autism,
Mhm.
is a very neuro-affirming action that all of us
Yeah.
can start to embrace.
Yes, kita
Yeah.
boleh terima
Betul.
that dia mendengar, dia mengambil perhatian.
Yes.
Tapi dia memang mungkin sedikit susah untuk buat eye contact dengan kita. So
Betul.
tak payahlah kita paksakan. Kita tak
Yes.
payahlah nak, fikirkan benda ni dari segi kurang ajar lah dan sebagainya.
Yeah.
Because those
Tak
things
berdisiplin,
also that
yeah.
is like that is very learned, right? We
Yes.
talked about that from the social aspect and things like that. Kita
Betul.
yang set those rules.
Yeah.
Kita yang kata benda ni adalah sopan. Ini adalah yang betul. Tapi kadang-kadang boleh juga kita membuat adjustment. So I want to come to something interesting because I know Anit boleh ceritakan apakah keadaan di mana seseorang anak atau individu tidak diberi pendekatan seperti ini, and what happens when you're not taking into consideration the child. Definitely this was not neuro-affirming, so let's hear from Anit what happened. And I think everybody will now agree about how just kalau kita tengok it's just Anit, you speak, it's crazy. I've used the word crazy. It was so upsetting.
Okay, so bila anak sulung saya Nirav pergi ke kindergarten Montessori masa tu, mereka
Dia
mengajar.
kata je Montessori. Okay, so Nuri diam.
Okay.
Sorry, clearly I'm so upset about this. Okay.
So dia diajar bersama dengan anak-anak lain bagaimana untuk membaca dengan menggunakan teknik phonics. The phonics learner and sounds. Tapi dia tidak berminat dengan cara mereka mengajar tu. So dia memang walk away.
Sebab dia dah boleh baca.
Ya, sebab dia dah boleh baca. So bila kita pergi untuk parents teachers meet, kami diberitahu, suami saya dengan saya, that Nirav cannot read. So we are terkejut. Kat rumah dia boleh baca. Kenapa kat sekolah dia kata tak boleh baca? No, he doesn't know his sounds. He doesn't know blending. He doesn't know this. Okay. So dengan setegas-tegasnya kami mengatakan, listen. Take him aside. Bagi dia bahan bacaan. Test dulu.
Yeah.
Okay. So 2 hari selepas tu kami dipanggil semula. Cakap, yes, he can read. But he reads by sight.
Sight reading, not phonics.
Not phonics. And but that's not the way we teach it. Dia kena ada method dia. You kena start with sounds, lepas tu blending, lepas tu 3-letter word, lepas tu macam ni. So
step by step
by step. Okay. Saya faham untuk anak-anak lain itu adalah caranya. Tapi untuk Nirav, kalau dia sudah belajar, memang dia akan bosan. So kalau dia tak ikut apa yang cikgu tu cakap, sebab dia dah tahu. Dia dah tahu belajar. So that, okay lah, biarlah dia. I buatlah benda lain. That was his way of doing it. So bila kami advocate untuk anak kita, cakap mungkin dia perlukan cara lain, dia kata tapi tak, ni ada sistem dia. So lepas banyak berfikir panjang tu.
So what do you do?
Tukar sekolah.
Wise parents.
Wise parents. Boleh saya
Bijak.
tanya Anit, yang ni sebelum
Keluarga
ke
ni.
selepas dapat diagnosis ni?
Sebelum.
Yeah.
But you were already so neuro-affirming then.
Ya, sebab dia dah boleh baca.
Instinctively,
Yeah. So-
instinctively Anit dah terima. And also the other thing I want to say is, I think cikgu tak boleh terima sebab Nirav has already reached the advanced level. Tak
For reading lah.
tak ikut
dia punya step by step lah, langkah-langkah dia, langkah-langkah yang sepatutnya di sekolah tu.
Cikgu yang tak boleh terima. Actually Nirav was way ahead of cikgu if you ask me.
So actually, this is inilah masalah sistem yang belum berubah untuk to sambut anak-anak kami yang diverse
yang berbeza.
dan berbeza dalam keupayaannya. So the system actually is the one that disable these different individual. So kalaulah ada pegawai-pegawai Kementerian Pembelajaran and so forth, allowlah the system to change a bit faster. We understand it takes some time.
Yep.
So actually coming back to cerita Anit, sebagai ibu bapa, kami memang perlu bantu, support, menjeritkan, kuat-kuat,
Pushy parent.
meluahkan. Kerana sebenarnya many of the unique ability is actually not allowed. The talent is suppressed. So you just shared a very important story that the ibu bapa sebenarnya is one of the best educator
Yes.
and one of the best advocate for anak-anak kami semua. Yeah. So let's encourage us. That's why we are here to share. Yeah, kita family here to share all our cerita-cerita and be bold. Kak Felina, our late Kak Felina, said that.
Yes.
Be bold and be there and to just keep nudging, but collaboratively, kan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Celebrate diversity and memperakui kekuatan seseorang individu itu dan cara pembelajarannya yang berlainan. So that's how you make it strength-based.
Wah. Menarik ni. Kakak yang sendiri saya tak pernah dengar jerit tiba-tiba hari ni kata kita kalau perlu patut menjerit untuk apa? Untuk memperjuangkan anak-anak kita. Tapi
Sometimes it's
itulah.
necessary. Unfortunate. I mean, there are times when memang kita boleh, we can have the mediation, the conversations, but how many of that can you have sometimes?
And sometimes you need to understand that anak-anak neurodivergent ini memang tidak faham kenapa dia perlu buat sesuatu.
Yes.
And kalau dia tak faham, dia tak akan buat. So saya boleh ceritakan sebab anak saya juga bila dia perlu buatkan latihan, sila huraikan nombor ini dalam perkataan. Sila huraikan perkataan ini dalam nombor. That was one part of the syllabus yang mula-mula dengan matematik. State this figure in a word sentence and otherwise. Dia tak nak buat. Dia memang tak nak buat. Sampai satu hari tu dia tengah tengok saya tengah tulis check. And dia tanya, what's that? So I kata, I'm writing a check and this is how I used to pay for this bill. Lepas tu then dia pandang lagi. So lepas tu I tahu apa yang dia tengah fikir. I said, that is why you do that exercise. Because you have to write in words
On the
and in
check.
sentence in a check. Otherwise I cannot pay. Then you cannot get what you want because I'm paying the bill and we bought this and we bought that. Lepas tu terus, okay. Dan daripada hari itu dia tak pernah complain pasal that activity. Sebab dia faham kenapa dia perlukan skill itu atau
Yes.
skill set itu.
Which makes sense. But tapi sekarang dah ada online banking by the way.
Sekarang scan
So,
saja.
thankfully masa tu zaman check.
Ada
I
lagi,
think
ada
it's
lagi
okay.
check.
I think it's okay. The point is kita kita membantu anak kita dari segi menunjukkan ataupun memberi penjelasan juga tentang apakah sebenarnya keperluan untuk membuat sesuatu, right? And I think sometimes we forget that. That really definitely will happen. So yes, Didi.
They need to know the significance, the reason behind apa-apa yang dia belajar. Macam contoh kan, anak saya masa dia umur 4 tahun tu dia dah boleh start, dah boleh communicate sikit lah. So kita kan biasa bila anak kecil ni kita akan tanya dia, oh what's your mother's name? What's your father's name? What's your name? So biasalah kita kan Asian mom suka test anak kita kan sebab kita nak rasa bangga, oh anak kita dah boleh buat kan. So I tanya lah dia,
Tahu tak apa.
what's your mother's name? So dia senyap je. So I ulang lagi, what's your mother's name? Because I know she already know the answer kan. Lepas tu kali ketiga I tanya, what is your mother's name? Nak tahu dia jawab apa? Dia jawab, don't you know your name, Mama?
I love that.
Tahu tak apa. Don't you know your name? Kenapa you tanya I? So lepas tu
dia tak faham kan, kita nak practice supaya kalau ada apa-apa dia hilang ke apa ke, bila orang lain tanya dia boleh jawab lah.
Tapi itu, but that was not the context. That was mama tanya pasal nama mama. Right?
Yelah,
It
tapi
was not.
it's a
I think kalau
training.
orang lain tanya, mungkin dia akan jawab.
Ya.
Kita tak tahulah, tapi training kita pun, mak boleh jadi cikgu juga. So macam pada kita train, tapi pada dia yalah kan, the thinking is different. Kalau budak-budak typical, I never heard of such incident. They would just answer whatever the script that they had learned, isn't it? They would just answer.
So itu dia. So itu dia, Didi. That is the expert, strength. At that time that you notice, dia memang sudah expert. Saya sudah tahu. Kenapa ni testing lagi, right?
Yeah.
So that recognizing that strength base, then you won't get annoyed, kan? Because otherwise, biasanya if you just tanya anak-anak tu, they just reply, kan?
Yeah.
But they recognize themselves. I've got it. Kenapa saya di test lagi, kan? So they were curious what you were doing. Very good story.
And
Did
very
you
concerned.
also get them to hafal nombor telefon ke apa, Didi?
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
just-
I did. Sorry.
Yeah,
Ask Didi.
because I know I did. So I just nak tanya.
Yes. In fact, Zaid gunakan nombor telefon dia sebagai one of the passwords. So that, she needed
Dia
to
orang ingat.
remember
They will
lah.
always
Okay.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a good technique.
Password Wi-Fi rumah Didi.
Okay, I know it.
You perlu sebab you akan pergi ke Kota Kinabalu nanti.
So sebagai an extension of the skill and the strength base, buat masa ni, cyber security companies are hiring, selecting neurodivergent autistic individual to be hired in the industry.
Yes.
So progressing what appears to be a simple ability is a very, very employable and very sought after ability.
And a high-paying job.
A very
Yeah.
high paying job.
No, because again, tahap kemahiran dia dalam sesuatu perkara tu adalah jauh, lebih daripada, orang lain lah. And not just pandai sikit. It's banyak. Because macam Didi huraikan tadi kan, dia sangat-sangat berminat. So dia memang akan carilah segala jenis apa maklumat tambahan. Dia akan cuba memahami segala selok-belok apa yang berkenaan dengan tu. I think if I'm not mistaken, masa kita tahun lepas ada satu event dekat Oasis Place, kita berpeluang untuk berjumpa dengan wakil dari Petronas kan.
Yeah.
So Petronas as a GLC, we were so happy. There's a Petronas family in Kota Kinabalu. They have started to hire neurodivergents. It start slowly, of course. Tapi yang sangat menarik yang diceritakan lah pada kami pada masa tu, dia kata that for this particular job, they have like a test and assessment and things like that. It's part of the hiring of this very technical skill set. I think was, connected to being able to analyze certain things and data and stuff like that. So tiba-tiba di dalam sejarah tak pernah tengok skor yang paling tinggi macam tu. Sebab tak pernah minta orang neurodivergent yang buat the test. So of course, tiba-tiba they had it and they had the highest scores ever.
That's right.
So of course, these people were hired lah. And they made the accommodation. Maknanya dari segi Petronas dekat tempat bekerja tu, dia telah menyiapkan tempat yang lebih sesuai, mengadakan latihan untuk team yang di mana mereka akan terlibat, the department and so on. So there was a lot of preparation lah untuk memastikan
Kebolehan mereka semua.
the new employees lah, yang neurodivergent ni memang dapat
Reasonable accommodation.
memulakan pekerjaan, tanggungjawab, jawatan baru dengan keadaan yang baik kerana they were given the reasonable accommodation.
And keadaan yang selesa untuk mereka perform secara optimum.
Yes, and the training for the rest of them, right? The rest of the team to sort of accept, and then
To
of course as
understand,
they came on board, their onboarding pun ada training jugalah. But it was all around, kan? So it was all around. So that's also, again, I think one of those things where we are like, okay, we have to look at multiple aspects, right? So just now we were talking about kita tak boleh ketepikan je 100% the medical model, right? Dan kita tidak mahu hanya bergantung kepada itu juga, sebab kadang-kadang terlalu menekankan the so-called deficits, the cabaran, the kelemahan and the so-called problems, right? So that's why it was not enough, it was not the complete picture. Tapi kalau kita cuma menyebut the social model and the strengths and all that, we are all sorts of different people, right? So for example, kalau kita ambil pendekatan macam tu je, yang kita di sini semua yang memerlukan cermin mata ke contact lens ke apa, kita takkan dapat lah. Kita takkan dapat lah kita punya benda ni, because it's like nobody is recognizing that we cannot see.
It's a deficit.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's the complete picture, I think, if I can round up that way, to say that we are still, at least at this point in time, selagi kita tidak sampai pada satu tahap di mana apa yang perlu dari medical model mungkin boleh terus diambil, dan mungkin apa-apa yang kita rasa agak kurang atau perlu diubah, insyaAllah akan diubah. But for the moment, memang sah, dan there's a validity to it that we need, that we still need, right? But kita nak juga menceritakan tentang the social model lah, so supaya orang tidak memikirkan sahaja bahawa goes back to that whole thing about kalau anak kita menerima suatu diagnosis is not like the end of the world. This is like, it's only all these things, which is all the problems that you will face, right? It's to remember the whole person, going back again to about being human.
Uniquely
we can say
human.
that. Yes, uniquely human, but human. Any last words from everybody? Otherwise, I think we can wrap up this. I think, yeah, we're okay
Let's
today.
celebrate strengths. That's it.
Celebrating. Say thank you, Anit. How about Didi and KK? Any last words?
Well, neuroaffirming, mengiktiraf, menerima dan tidak lagi menghakimi.
Oh, yes.
Mm.
No judgment.
Agree.
No judgment.
Okay.
Sokong.
Sokong penuh.
Okay, on that note, kita akan berjumpa pada episod yang akan datang. Buat sementara, kita nak ingatkanlah supaya mengikuti kami di semua social media platform. We are on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We also have, selain daripada YouTube, which you are on right now, there is Spotify, of course. So silalah follow, like, share, subscribe, apa-apa yang patut. We ask for your support so that we can continue our work. See you next time. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum.
Terima kasih.